delight to be here in the great city of London with the wonderful Rabbi Alex Goldberg, who is the campus rabbi at the University of Surrey and so many other roles he's playing in society, as we're going to learn. Nice to talk to you.
Lovely to meet you.
So what is Jewish life like at the University of Surrey?
So I've got two bits of my job.
Yeah.
Shmuly. One is I still am campus rabbi. I have been for years and years and years, even before I was a rabbi. Anyway, that's a long story. But I'm also dean of religious life. So the beginning of my day is like a really bad joke. You know, my office is literally, an imam, a vicar, a priest, a monk all walk in. So I manage a team of 20 chaplains or 20 religious life and belief associates and chaplains from 8 faiths and world views. So that's really exciting. Campus life, we have a small Jewish community on campus, about 150 to 180. And during lockdown, I found 150 Jews in the villages. So I live in an area outside of London, where it's a county town, what we call a market town. And there's all these Jews that are in the village. They all think they're the only Jew in the village. Which is a problem, because I invite them over for supper and they meet the other Jews in the village and they go, well, I can't live there any longer.
So now what are you doing in chaplaincy? Tell us about your chaplaincy.
So chaplaincy is great. I run what do we do in chaplaincy? It's a really good question. I cater for anything, well, at the moment, 16,000 staff and students. Our campus is majority religious because we have a lot of international students from India and Nigeria. Oh. We have hot and cold running services, anything you like. I mean, Jewishly, yes, we have Shabbat services, that's great, and festivals. But the Religious Life and Belief Centre, called the Roundhouse, you can have Mass and Puja, and we have an Islamic prayer room where you can pray 5 times a day. So it's quite an active. In March, April this year, because I don't know if you know this, but there was the convergence of festivals, a thing that happens every 27 years when Passover and Easter and Ramadan and Holi and all sorts of things, and Vasaki, all coincide. So we had 5,000 unique individuals making many visits. Yeah. So we do that. We also have on campus, just so two things you might want to bring up. We have a cost of living lunch for those that can't afford it on a Wednesday. And we also have a faith and leadership program that we do with other universities around Europe. So things like that.
So in the spirit of interfaith dialogue, interfaith collaboration, what's something that has happened that makes you optimistic, and what's something that makes you pessimistic about kind of bridging some of these divides?
I think it's really interesting because we're living in a world where the students I have today are Generation Z. I think that what I'm seeing, which is optimistic, is people are coming to the table. They're wanting to act together, but yet from their own faith. So in the past, it was either very secularized Jews, Christians, whatever it happened to be, coming together and going, well, we'll come together as for humanity. Or you had very religious communities separating apart, going into their own spaces. And I think now you've got actually Gen Z is a little bit more relaxed and is happy to come together.
Just so you know, Z is called Z.
Z. Yes, it's one of our differences.
So what was your experience at the UN? What have you been involved with at the UN?
So the UN, what's going on? Pessimism, all right.
Oh yes, let's go to pessimism first, excuse me.
Pessimism. I think during Britain's had a really strange experience the last 5-6 years, where you've got the certainly on the left, you've had the rise of anti-Semitism, and the far right, you've always had anti-Semitism. Yeah. And that's impacted itself sometimes in student politics and elsewhere within the British Labour Party. Some of that's changing, which is also positive, but for a number of years it wasn't good. And I think Jewish students didn't always feel safe on campuses around the country, and that's impacted everywhere. So that's a bad thing, I would say. Yeah. What were you going to say? UN?
Yes, the UN. Tell us about your work over there.
United Nations. So as well as being a rabbi, I'm a barrister. As a court advocate, we have 2 sorts of lawyers in this country. One is solicitors, which are regular attorneys, and the other one wear wigs. So I remember at the time my rabbi used to tell me, he before I got married. He's the one that wears the sheitel. So it's we wear wigs, which is an 18th century dress. And so I'm a barrister. I'm a human rights activist. I have been led an NGO at the UN. I've changed international law, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a rabbi. So the UN discovered me and went, well, there aren't that many people like you who care about human rights and know the law and are a religious leader. So they basically hired me as a consultant. I have to say, for the video purposes, I work in cooperation with the United Nations on something called Faith for Rights, which is their framework. What are they scared about? They came up with a concern that human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant, and other human rights treaties was seen as secular doctrine today, despite the fact that the authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came from fairly religious positions. There's one we don't know about, but Eleanor Roosevelt was a frum Episcopalian. René Cassin was Jewish, whilst being sort of very much part of that secular French society and taking his orders during the war from General de Gaulle. He decided to debate the rabbis and every Wednesday afternoon at the Alliance Israelite or whenever it was. So he's a really fascinating character. And you have Charles Malik, who's a Maronite from Lebanon. So these guys are writing this thing and they're trying to use their religious values to do so. So we're trying to bring together a set of exercises, if you like, which try and bridge the world of religious tradition with the world of human rights. And we trained religious leaders and they piloted in the UK. We've got wonderful venues. We've got one, Windsor Castle, which is home to, that's the proper home of the, was the Queen. Oh no, actually when we ended up there, it was no longer the Queen, it was the home of the King. She had just passed away. And we got the BBC, which is another great pillar of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Edinburgh Castle. Oh, and Lambeth Palace, which is the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury. So these are very, very English establishments. And trying to train, we trained over 100 leaders, ordained faith, ministers of faith, whatever you call it. And that was good. And we also did 25 journalists and experiments on the BBC. So it was, what we were trying to do there was see how the programs worked, what the impact was on people, whether that concept worked, and it has. And so I still speak on behalf of UN conferences, and I think I like it. I like the fact that the UN engages, and actually within, I'm not supposed to say this, but within our little team that works there, the two people that work at the UN on this is a very senior man who's the chief of treaties, a guy called Ibrahim, who's from Egypt, Michael, who is from Central Europe and is Christian. I'm Jewish,
cool.
And the special rapporteur on religion of freedom from University of Oxford here is a Baha'i. So it's a cool team. Yeah.
Wow. So going back to something you touched on, anti-Semitism in the country.
Yes.
And you implied it's getting better. That what was emerging out of Labour, what was emerging out of some aspects of the left or far left, has improved. What's changed? And this new prime minister since last year. How does he seem to be on this front?
Yeah, I don't want to get into left and right party politics here. I think there are problems everywhere. Yeah, I think there are problems certainly for the younger generation on social media. It's still, incessant, and it's getting louder, and it's certainly during lockdown. It's very uncomfortable for young people here, and I that's not good. But when you have a leader of the Labour Party who, if I was being charitable, is very unlucky with the friends that he sits with, extremely. I don't know anyone that's been as unlucky as him. But he ended up again and again and again on platforms with people who had horrific views about Jews. I'm not talking about being pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, or that. I mean, people that really were talking, had done nasty things or said nasty things about Jewish people. And that was not helpful. We now have, I think, a leader of the main opposition who is sympathetic to the Jewish community, understands the Jewish community quite intimately. I think it's a secret. His children are Jewish. I think that's a huge change. And I think that also the actions taken, there was an official inquiry into the Labour Party by we have an Equalities Watchdog, which is a government body, and they've taken up those recommendations and run with it. The Conservative Party in recent years hasn't had that problem, but in the 1980s had more conservative anti-Semitism. We're speaking a week where somebody very conservative in the United States has passed away who caused problem in the 80s, but that sort of anti-Semitism. So we struggle, and I think that Jews are trying their hardest to be who they are in Europe, and they know what to hit them. Also, I mean, globally, during the pandemic, this will be the same as sure in the United States, I get briefings on the nasties because of my position at the university. The last 6 nasties I was given a briefing on by the government. They all hated different groups, but their conspiracy theories were, but that group is really controlled by the Jews. And so these Jewish conspiracy theories came up, and it was during COVID, and I think they're still there. Whether it's a big super space gun which aims at the whatever it is, or
so I know
more traditional forms of anti-Semitism.
Soccer's a big deal over here.
Soccer.
What,
yes.
do you have a religious relationship to soccer?
Well, I do. I chair we have something called the Football Association, which was the original Football Association. It's like the NFL, I guess. Yes. And the Football Association runs our national stadium and runs England football team, and a bit more, and the regulations. And so I have been for over a decade chair of the faith reference group there. Yes, I have a religious relation. So I have a group of religious leaders that try and work with the soccer authorities. And sadly, I got in there for the wrong reasons. Again, it was Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and we set up a commission on that. We have here, I don't see it happening in American games, but you can tell me, we have here shouting on the terraces, abuse on the terraces. Wow. It used to be aimed at the Afro-Caribbean players, people of Afro-Caribbean origin in the 1980s, but we still have a lot of chanting, anti-Semitic chanting on the terraces.
Oh my gosh.
Some aimed at one team in London, which traditionally is linked to the Jewish world. Tottenham Hotspur, which doesn't help that their fans are very happy to call themselves the Yid Army, which is... and so on and so forth. But I've been in matches where people are singing about Auschwitz and making gas chamber noises and things like that.
My gosh!
So it's that's the horrific side. The great side of it, Shmuly, I think you'll like this, is the fact that I managed. As time went on, I thought, well, actually, what I really want to be about is bringing communities together. So I used to take over football stadiums, bring in 19 or so schools. Some, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, but non-religious schools, but most of those had one ethnic group or one religious group, and they were all in the east of London. Even schools 500 metres apart, we have parallel communities. So there are 2 or 3 schools we knew that were 500 metres or yards or whatever you want to use. It doesn't matter. Where one was 90% from the Bengali or Bengali heritage, Muslim community, and the other one 90% white. But we mixed all these schools up at West Ham, and then we did a programme later at Wembley, the National Stadium, where they discussed faith, identity, citizenship, and they got to play a bit of football and lift the FA Cup. I don't know if there's an equivalent in the United States, but this cup has been fought for 150 years. And so this is like a religious shrine now,
Yeah. So I don't know the extent that you've watched Ted Lasso. But,
Ted Lasso is great.
I'd love to hear, is this a good representation of that soccer culture here? And do you think there's any big takeaways or lessons from that show? Because there's very few shows I can think of recently that in America, are based here, where there's really an access to the culture here. Is it accurate? And it's very touching, very, very, very moving show.
Yeah, I mean, it's caricatured, isn't it?
Yes.
And there's a lot around, but I think that there is a kernel of truth in it. One of the great managers in this country is featured in the end of the last series. So Pep Guardiola, who was the manager of Barcelona and Biet and Manchester City. I don't support them, but they've just won the treble, which is a big thing.
Oh, is he the one that Rupert knocks down?
No, that's an actor. But
okay.
In the episode before where they beat their big rival.
Okay.
And
when he shakes his hand.
Yes, and he says, "I like what you do. I like what you do." Yes.
Yeah.
So that's Pep, and he's just won everything there is to be won in Europe, and it's a very rare occurrence. I haven't once before in this country.
Oh, interesting.
So I think when it does get into that football, you see some of the guys at the pub and the name calling and all that. It's toned down, if anything. And there's a bit of drinking culture around it. And if you go to some of the big soccer teams in England, there will be pubs about 100 metres from the stadium, 200 metres, and some of the fans will never go into the stadium. They'll just hang out at the pub, like 1,000, 2,000,
really?
and watch on the screens.
Really?
Because
Wow.
that's the atmosphere. It's an Arsenal pub or a Tottenham pub or a West Ham pub. So I think a lot of that, they use real clubs. They don't get into the culture of the real clubs. Richmond's obviously made up. Actually, it's based in a very nice twee area, but they make that out. Look, the whole humour around it about an American football coach who doesn't understand soccer or the culture of this country, and starts to embrace it through the 3 series and starts to care about it, I think is beautiful. And I think they do capture the essence of the passion around football in this country and all that. Shmuly, my first job ever was in Glasgow in Scotland, and I remember sitting on a committee. I was working for something called Jewish Continuity, but it was a cross-community, pluralistic organisation, and we had a little group of where are the under 30s in the community. Yeah, everyone does that. And I said, so we went round all the synagogues of all the denominations and so on. So, well, I think there were 5 last week and there were 10. So we got up to a whole great figure of like 21 between 7 synagogues or 30. Sorry, Glasgow area. I love my time there. I love your community. And I said, I can take you somewhere this weekend where you have 200-300. In fact, 2 places. One is Glasgow Rangers and one is Glasgow Celtic. And they go, and they all looked at each other and go, oh yeah, for sure. So the first event we did after that was we did an event at Glasgow Rangers, which had a Jewish director at the time. And lo and behold, a couple of 100 people turned up, which they went to. So I think the idea of football can bring the community together. So it's got huge potential. I always say when I'm I've been lucky enough. I've been lucky enough to be asked. I was on a panel organised by David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, looking at football and racism. But I always say, look, soccer has a huge magnet, like Ted Lasso, and the Believe thing, isn't it? To bring people together, because it's, it can be one ball, one game, one community, which is represented in the Richmond thing. Yeah. But it also has the other side of it. If you've got 2 rival clubs anyway, which can be 2 halves, 2 teams and 2 communities, and I think the choice is ours. So I think we're trying to change that. Religion is a problem for us. We put, many of the teams play on Shabbat. In the modern age, half the games now on weekdays, which is good. Well, it's good for me. I can go and see them. But I think that there's always a passion here. We haven't won. The World Cup is everything, and England won it once at Wembley, actually, where we do the programmes in 1966, which is a long time ago and before I was born. I think before you were born. And so there are songs about how many years we wait. Actually, one sung by a Jewish guy called David Biet. And I think that unless you can bring the whole community in to play football, and you have flexible football and young people coming in, you're not going to win the World Cup. So I say, look, you have to extend that to more conservative religious communities. Our community is always going to be a bit of a challenge with Shabbat, but
right, beautiful.
There we go.
Friends, follow the great work and ideas of Rabbi Alex Goldberg. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's nice chatting to you.
Continue,